There were 3 police cars parked on the street in front of our house. Our alleyway was blocked off by an ambulance, and a couple of cops stood on the stoop talking together while another was posted beside the back door. The women on the block, most of them still in their aprons, were on their front stoops trying to figure out what was going on, and all the kids were huddled on the sidewalk across the street from our house, peering out at the cops and the ambulance from between the row of parked cars. Never before could I remember them silently gathered together like that, looking so apprehensive. Our downstairs neighbor was dead. Mr. Wishnow had committed suicide. That was why everything I could never have expected to see was now right outside the door of our house. Weighing barely 80 pounds, he had been able to strangle himself by stringing the living room curtain cord over the wooden rod in the back foyer coat closet, then looping them around his neck and falling forward off the edge of the kitchen chair where he'd seated himself inside the closet. When Selden, home from school, went to put his coat away, he found his father in his pajamas hanging face down on the closet floor amid the family's rubbers and galoshes. My first thought on hearing the news was that I no longer had to be fearful of hearing a coughing fit emanating from the dying man in the first-floor flat whenever I was alone in the cellar, or of hearing him in my bed on the floor above when I was trying to fall asleep. But then I realized that the ghost of Mr. Wishnow would now join the circle of ghosts already inhabiting the cellar, and that just because I was relieved he was dead, he would go out of his way to haunt me for the rest of my life. Since I didn't know what else to do, I at first kneeled at the side of the parked cars, hiding there with the other kids. None of them had a conception, any larger than my own, of the cataclysm that had befallen the Wishnows. But it was from their whisperings that I pieced together how Mr. Wishnow had died, and how he'd been found, and learned that Selden and his mother were inside with one of the policemen and the medics, and with the corpse. The corpse was what the kids were all waiting to see. I waited with them, rather than wind up entering the back hallway just as they were carrying Mr. Wishnow down the stairs. Nor did I want to get home and have to sit there alone until my mother, my father, or Sandy appeared. As for Alvin, I wanted never to see him again or to be questioned about him by anyone. The woman who emerged from the house accompanying the medics wasn't Mrs. Wishnow, but my mother. I couldn't understand why she was home from work until it dawned on me that the dead father they were carrying away was my own. Yes, of course, my father had committed suicide. He couldn't take any more of Lindbergh and what Lindbergh was letting the Nazis do to the Jews of Russia, and what Lindbergh had done to our family right here, and so it was he who had hanged himself, in our closet. I didn't have hundreds of memories of him then. I had just one, and it did not seem to me at all important enough to be the memory I ought to be having. Alvin's last memory of his father was him closing the car door on his little boy's finger. Mine of my father was him greeting the stump of a man who begged him every day outside his office building. "How are you doing, little Robert?" my father said, and the stump man replied, "How are you, Herman?" It was here that I edged myself between the closely parked cars and darted out across the street. When I saw the sheet covering my father's body and face, couldn't possibly allow him to breathe, I began to wail. Don't, darling," my mother said. "There's nothing to be frightened of." She put her arms around my head and held me to her and repeated, "There's nothing to be frightened of. He was sick and he was suffering and he died. Now he's not suffering any more." "He was in the closet," I said. "No, he wasn't. He was in his bed. He died in his bed. He was very, very sick. You know that. That's why he coughed all the time." By now the ambulance doors were swung open to receive the stretcher. The medics carefully maneuvered it inside and pulled the doors shut behind them. My mother stood next to me on the street, holding my hands in hers, and to my amazement looked perfectly composed. Only when I made a move to break away from her and run after the ambulance, only when I cried, "He can't breathe!" did she finally realize what was torturing me. "It's Mr. Wishnow. It's Mr. Wishnow who is dead." She shook me gently, shook me back and forth to bring me to my senses. "It's Selden's father, dear. He died from his illness this afternoon." I couldn't tell if she was lying to keep me from becoming more hysterical, or if she was telling the wonderful truth. "Selden found him in the closet?" "No, I told you no. Selden found his father in his bed. Selden's mother wasn't home, so we called the police. I came because Mrs. Wishnow called me at the store and asked me to help her. Do you understand? Daddy's at work. Daddy's working. Oh, what on earth have you been thinking? Daddy will be home for dinner soon. So will Sandy. There's nothing to be afraid of. Everybody will be home. Everybody is coming home. We'll have our dinner, she said reassuringly, and everything is going to be fine. And there we will pause.